Hi, my name's Ken Smith, and I'm a design fellow at Architecture for Humanity, and I'm getting ready to start my presentation today on my projects, and it's about restoring communities and processes in crisis. So my background, basically my educational background is in international relations and landscape architecture. I spent a couple of years as a congressional intern, and then I had an 18-year career in high tech, mostly doing communications, international marketing, and public policy. So the first thing I want to talk about is the global water crisis. Is something I'm really interested in. The scope of what I've become interested in has gotten huge. Talking about water organization, sediment filters, clay filters, chemical treatment, solar pasteurization. And I've had a couple of interns working with me on the project, and I just got Audrey, thank you very much. She's going to be joining me on this project to bring it all together. And then Audrey also had the really great idea of not only talking about, we were going to talk about case studies, but actually incorporating design. So ways you can think about where people would gather and get their filtered water from some sort of service. And we might actually go into some design solutions. We're big fans of the Fez River restoration in Morocco, so we want to talk about stuff like that also. And the idea is to create a very sort of simple booklet that people can download that would probably be on World Changing, but we would like to have it be backed by sort of hard product information, especially when it comes to rainwater harvesting and stuff like that. So that's the ultimate goal. This came in through the New York chapter. A really cool architect in New York. His sister is a researcher on the Lassa virus for Tulane University in West Africa, and he is pro bono giving his time to design these Lassa virus clinics, and he asked me to help him on the first one, doing some modeling and some landscape proposals. So this was his sketch, which I thought was really cool. And I actually put the model together for him, which he said was so helpful because he's actually dealing with the US Navy. They're actually funding the project. So now we're getting ready to start talking about some of the actual landscape ideas. So I'm talking about healing gardens, which is something I did a lot of research on when I was in grad school. So this starts my Happy Hearts work. And this was actually the 16 Septiembre school in Veracruz, Mexico. Since the last one had been destroyed by floods, they were really worried, obviously, about another issue with floods. So it's actually kind of built on the ridge of some hills. The setting is, it's at the base of the third highest peak in North America. It's Mount Orizaba. It's very much a mountaineering community. Actually, their specialty in this town was saddlery, so like leather goods, blankets. And it's also the setting off point for people who go and do adventure sports on the volcano. So I tried to keep that theme throughout. So what I did is I actually found a saddlery shop that was in Coscamatepec, which is the town where this is at. And in this leather saddle was this really cool kind of a Greek key pattern that was actually woven into the saddle. So that is actually where I got the idea for what I'm calling the saddlery motif, which actually forms the paths for the school. As part of this sort of mountaineering community, T-Luke and I were talking about, we have a fire pit, which is sort of a reading pit, so they can bring their chairs out from the classrooms and they can sit around the fire, because it's actually cooler up there, and read the books. There's a community garden, which they requested. It's actually a very rich agricultural town as well. And then you can't see it as well, but behind the building that's in the upper right-hand corner, there's actually a climbing wall. So I used the motif of the tile. It's like it goes through the wall and then comes up the other side and flips up, and then there's a junior climbing wall there. And then we have the big sports pitch, and then I have an outdoor classroom at the bottom. If you look at the tiles, they pop up, and the tiles form seating, so there's a lot of passive seating. And part of that for me was sort of a metaphor of using your heritage to kind of lift you up from a status perspective. And then in all the staired areas, I use the pyramidal stairs, because the heritage there is the Olmec heritage, which are the pyramided architecture, the ancient architecture. So that's that project. And then I worked on the Chincha school in Peru. Anyway, this is the area that's known for the Nazca lines. I don't know if you guys know the Nazca lines. This area only receives about 1 inch of rain a year, and as a result, these lines that they drew in the desert have never washed away. So it's kind of interesting. And they have hummingbirds and monkeys and spiders, and then they have all these really interesting angles circles and straight lines that line up with different time with the sun and the moon at different times of the year. But this is definitely the strong symbol for the region. So what I did is I took the architect's, that was his layout, and he had a simple landscape plan in there. If you look at the bottom of the screen, sort of where all the lines end up, was just a strict corridor. And what I did is with a simple bump out, I created what was sort of a little theater. And then what I proposed is digging it out to make an amphitheater, so that sort of fanned out area is actually an amphitheater. So you have this idea of you just dig out and bump out the corridor for a very small price, you get a performance space. And then some of the other things I did, there's a woman's collective that actually, T-Luke might have talked about them before, but they do tiles and different types of masonry. If you look right by the sports pitch below, there are just these vertical walls that come up. And the vertical walls, what they are is on the one side, kids can be on the pitch and they can play racket sports, because tennis is really big in Peru. They can do handball, they can do anything. And then on the other side, there's a cantilevered bench that actually has a mosaic with a Nazca symbol on the other side. And the idea was, again, it was very inexpensive. We were going to use this technology from the women's co-op to do this. So the next thing I want to talk about is T-Luke and I, as you guys know, have been teaching this Dance for Social Change independent study with Alicia. It's been awesome. I think we would all three of us agree that we had just had so much fun doing this project. It started out, she came here the first day. I was looking at her resume. She is really involved in dance at Berkeley. She's like captain of all these dance teams, and I was like, wow, I'm really surprised that you're choosing architecture over dance. And she said, well, what I'd really love to do is I'd really love to find a way to integrate my love of dance and my love of architecture. Well, of course, T-Luke and I like pricked out, like, well, let us tell you all the ways. So by the end of our very first meeting, it was amazing. We had decided that we would take a sports for social change model, we would apply it to dance, and that if we could, and if she had time in her research, we would actually take it and apply it toward the Open Architecture Challenge, and we would actually use a former base to use as our initial program proposal. And the reason we thought it would work, some of the things that Alicia's found out in her research, and we've been researching with her, is just sort of using the inherent strengths of sports for social change. She was really interested in Kigali because her issue that she wants to solve is conflict resolution. Her particular site is in Ukraine, but in an area that was Crimean, that was then Russian, that is now under Ukrainian rule, so there's a lot of cultural conflict. We looked at, it was basically what's fallen out is what works and why it works for football and why it works for specifically ballet is what she's proposing, is because rigorous and competitive activity, but it requires cooperation for success. And it has an understood international set of rules, so you don't have to speak the same language in order to participate together in the activity, which I think is really interesting. The site's really, really cool. It's a decommissioned Soviet military base. It's a submarine. It was so secretive that they actually took it off the maps during the Cold War. And you come in and like these giant doors open. It's very James Bond, like the submarines would go in and then the doors would close. But the whole thing is just fully programmed. There are all kinds of rooms, all kinds of hallways. There's a really fantastic museum there, so it's a really fantastic sort of example of a way to turn a former base into, a place of good, which is the idea of the challenge. The love of dance is kind of the bond. Ballet is the universal technique, but it's kind of the carrot to get people in there. Because once you can get them dancing together and cooperating together on something that's universally accepted, you can then go in and they can start teaching each other about their ethnic dances, right? You've established trust, you need each other to do the ballet, but then from there it can develop into something that's more esoteric for each one of the ethnicities. So this is Ghana, and what they're trying to do is create this really interesting 2-acre park in the middle of Accra, which has no open spaces for children. The lead architect that's working on this project, as I found out through my own research, his dad and mom are like the Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King of Ghana, which I thought was really fascinating. And his mom wrote this book in 1962, and it's all about how children play in Ghana. And what they want to do is bring back this kind of natural play that Ghanaian children did back then into sort of contemporary Accra life. But they really want a performance space, ideally, exhibition space, library, media-enabled, and of course sanitation. They want to do the natural programming, and I already mentioned the architect Ralph Sutherland, whose dad was the human rights leader of Ghana. And that is my presentation. Woo!